I share a kinship with the creator of WTF Happened in 1971.com. Clearly, we both care about understanding the world around us, and upon understanding that world, we project our findings onto a two-dimensional plane for the benefit of former strangers on the internet. But I imagine that that's where our similarities end. To an analyst, the author of WTF Happened in 1971.com seems to have stricken gold in a metaphorical sense. Independent data journalists hope, they yearn, to one day happen upon a pattern of information so revelatory, so earth-shattering, that central bankers, media outlets, and politicians have no choice, are compelled to lend an ear. And indeed, the creator of the site appears to have done just that, in only the way that I can dream. 1971 is a year in history, far before my birth. No year is insignificant, but if you were to ask me, Armand, what happened in 1971, I would rattle off a list I found on Wikipedia to the chagrin of my professors. And that makes me woefully naive to the fact that 1971 was the definitive year that the economy ceased to exist as we knew it. Everything went inexorably wrong that year at the hands of a few dudes in suits, a shadowy entity, and we've been sleepwalking deeper into economic Armageddon ever since. In 1971, we abandoned the gold standard, and we've been worse off ever since. It's a compelling and enticing thesis with clearly a tremendous volume of information behind it. But within that volume of information, we have the odd curiosities, its finer details, its ideology, and its true message that have found a strange recurrence in my life, that have ruined my life. And it's those odd curiosities of emergence that have me asking again, what happened in 1971? Now, there are a couple different interpretations of what 1971 means in the context of this site, but we will go through the information before us before getting into the metaphysical. So, August 15th, 1971. Then President Richard Nixon had an economy that was doing okay. Coming off of a recession in 1970, the economy exhibited moderate inflation and unemployment and fairly healthy economic growth. But there were some challenges ahead. Higher federal deficits as a result of the Vietnam War and persistent oil shocks were putting inflationary pressure on the economy while threatening to cut into growth. Nixon knew stagflation was possible, and stagflation is not a cute look for the economy. So to bring inflation under control specifically, Nixon and economists in the US start changing their thinking about monetary policy to give policymakers like those in the Federal Reserve more power to control the amount of money in circulation. By controlling interest rates and the money printer. This results in a number of policy changes known as the Nixon shock. As part of the Nixon shock, the US withdraws from the Bretton Woods Agreement, an agreement in which 44 nations pegged their currencies to the US dollar, and the US dollar was in turn pegged to gold. Namely, $1 was worth 1/35 a troy ounce of gold. Departing from this system is seen as an economic ground zero for some people. Not people who think like you and me, but people. So, what you should know is that from 1944 to 1971, the US dollar was tied to gold, and afterward, it was tied to America's credit, like the trustworthiness of its government, also like its army. It's more complicated than that, but that's what we need to know. Tying money or currency to something that's scarcity is enshrined in the geological properties of the universe is seen as favorable by people who want central authorities like the Federal Reserve to have less control over the amount of money in circulation. So with that information alone, August 15th, 1971 is a day that lives in infamy amongst an internet subculture of anarcho-capitalists, economic libertarians, and hyper-capitalist hobbyists. Invisible hand homies, if you will. Now, I should pause and say, I'm not dismissing all of their ideas as meritless, even though I do think some are a little impractical, and we would both agree that skepticism of people in positions of authority and institutions of power is a healthy thing. But there's a line there. The line of good faith. If you were to consult WTF happened in 1971.com about America's abandonment of the gold standard, you'd air quotes learn of a troubling decline in which inflation went absolutely crazy, making us all have less purchasing power. Currency values have gone basically to zero, making the value of the money that we hold nothing. Wages have stagnated. We became mired in global conflict like never before. Black Americans' income stopped growing altogether. Even marriages, the divorce rates began to rise, and male income became stagnant, but female income continued to rise. It's a bleak economic picture that touches all parts of the economy and so many demographics. So there you have it. We ruined the economy in 1971, and we should probably go back.
I think in order to revert these trends that we are required to deal with the source of the problem, which is the unsustainable, predatory fiscal policies and monetary policies of the 21st century nation state.
Although, now that I'm looking at this more closely, this one doesn't show the abandonment of the gold standard at all. It shows trade deals in the 80s and the 90s. The oil shocks, I think this is trying to point out, don't happen in 1971. They happen in the mid and late 1970s. And these, I don't even think these arrows point to anything significant at all. And the ones that do actually point to 1971 and what happened in post don't show what the creator clearly thinks or wants them to. This graph on inflation is misleading because of its axes. This is actually a better graph of inflation that shows stability. This isn't showing the dollar losing value, it's showing a stable dollar alongside gold as a commodity whose price fluctuates. This is just what happens when the two aren't necessarily legally bound together. Well, honestly, this one's kind of complicated. It's a blend of changed compensation structures, executive pay, especially national changes to labor composition, an insane rise in healthcare costs, a whole bunch, just so many anti-union, anti-labor practices that began mostly in the 1980s, but really spiritually began in the 1950s. And there's just so many more things to say about this. It's not just something that happened in 1971. This graph showing the relative incomes of Black Americans as a percentage of white American incomes should level off at 100%. There will necessarily be diminishing returns as it reaches parity. You would expect, as anti-discrimination measures go into effect and are adopted or reinforced, this will level off. People obviously aren't getting divorced because they stay up late at night arguing about how we would just be better off if we could exchange dollars for gold bullion versus the trustworthiness of Jerome Powell. It's just not something that's happening. This is showing the passage of no-fault divorce laws. And lastly, we love a graph that appeals to the manosphere, but the x-axis is pegged to incomes in 1948. It's not showing the actual median incomes in dollars for men and women. It's showing how income has changed for each respective group since 1948. It's an index. So the starting points for men and women here are vastly different. Notice how they both start at 100. They're supposed to when you're indexing to 100. Does the creator think men's and women's median incomes were the same in 1948? I haven't looked it up. Someone in the comments can tell me, but they were not. He keeps getting called out on these too, not just by me. Every few years, according to the Internet Archive, the site swaps out graphs and some new conspiracy is on there. He's got a lot of stamina. I'll give him that. But how could someone get these so wrong? And why does he keep taking graphs down and replacing them with equally inane bullshit? A lot of the criticism for this site focuses on the lack of analytical rigor or coherent thought, as we just have. That criticism that WTF happened in 1971.com is a bad faith analysis or just bad economics. It's, strictly speaking, correct. It is bad. It's conspicuously bad. The act of screenshotting a graph you found on the internet and drawing an arrow to say good before and bad after in light of the complex web of forces that influence the world is a wrong thing. It's a perfect case study in how a volume of data may result in less knowledge of the world. Each graph has diminishing and even negative entropy. And I'd argue that this is the point. What makes 1971 significant here is its place in a tapestry of softcore propaganda for gold standard advocates and a whole bunch of conspiratorial grifters looking to expand their influence or make a quick buck. Or, in the case of this creator, both.
In reality, to distinguish exactly between propaganda and information is impossible. Besides, information is an essential element of propaganda. For propaganda to succeed, it must have reference to political or economic reality. Doctrinal or historical argument is only incidentally effective in propaganda. It has power only in connection with the interpretation of events.
The analysis isn't meant to be good, but what these graphs are good for is for you to project upon them. The site and associated X account have their best days in times of high distrust and high uncertainty, times when simple, blunt answers and straight lines of association play very well. Like after a pandemic, which led to stimulus distribution at historically low rates, which led to high inflation. This would probably also play well after the 2008 recession, when animosity towards banks was rightfully red hot. Broader institutional distrust is sublimated into criticism of central banks as institutions that profit off the manipulation of currency. And in light of that all-encompassing malevolence, can you even afford not to like and subscribe to WTF Happened in 1971's newsletter to get the latest on gold standard conspiracy hokum? It's not an economics website at all. It's a global financial conspiracy website with the aesthetic trappings of economic rigor. In a way, it's similar to the apocalyptic theocratic fascist movement QAnon, even though I know that sounds weird, not necessarily in its ideology, but in its mechanics. Like, the argumentative structure of the site is one of just asking the question, similar to some but not all Q drops. The graphs, the ostensible facts leave a trail of breadcrumbs that will always lead back to an assigned date where decline began. But the facts, the puzzle pieces, are arbitrary and can be rearranged to whatever suits the prescribed end. The assigned antagonist is flattened to a simple, cartoonishly evil entity, person, or event that's so dangerous that it must be corrected with a radical, blunt solution. We must simply reject the Federal Reserve as it has been since 1971 and go back to where things were, or perhaps restore them in a more forward-looking way. The insights are left merely implied. There are very few words on this site, and yet I'm being gish-galloped by it all the same. The implied insights are coming so fast that I can't make time to go through every one. We'd be here all day. These graphs are meant to tap into cognitive bias and pre-existing distrust of institutions, pre-existing conspiracism. The insight is an exercise for the reader. If you're ever thirsty for some clout, there's fertile ground to be tilled in gold bug corners of the internet. You have your true believers, but you also have ideological groups with overlapping networks of belief that cynically view the information as a means to advance their worldview. Gold standard grifters can easily create a Big Tent audience made up of people who hold adjacent or tangential beliefs. Adherents to sovereign citizen movements and believers in Zionist-occupied government conspiracies have a place here. For instance, sovereign citizens believe that the legitimate US government was secretly replaced by an illegitimate government. Some believe that that change is specifically tied to the abandonment of the gold standard because they misinterpret willfully the Constitution, though even within this subset, there's disagreement over when precisely that abandonment occurred. Either in 1933, when President Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102, which required citizens to hand over their gold for commensurate compensation or face jail time, a fine, or both, or in 1971, after the Nixon shock. This is a subtle but important distinction within the movement from critique of executive authority specifically, which members may be less inclined to criticize in the present moment, to a critique of an imagined deep state. Believers in Zog conspiracies just have deeply hateful views over who specifically controls the Federal Reserve and, what that control is used for. We didn't go over these in depth previously, but I fear I have to bring them up now because it does illustrate the point. The experience of seeing these graphs on the site is jarring in a way that's different from seeing a chart of divorce rates, obvious hokum, It's jarring to see a graph of military aid to Israel in specific, or a graph showing foreign-born Americans in the context of a financial conspiracy site. What do they have to do with the Nixon shock, the gold standard, or the Fed at all? And the answer is nothing, just nothing whatsoever. But to someone who's primed to associate the global financial system and Israel, or someone whose beliefs have an inherent replacement theory flavor to them, these graphs serve to validate thoughts that are already there. And there will always be an audience for confirming information. The overlapping network of beliefs makes it easy to create association chains. The confusion between correlation and causation that these graphs demonstrate, that we went over in the last section, turns from a bug to a feature. You see what you want in correlations, not what is. And that's good for the creator, because then an association can be drawn between the abandonment of the gold standard, the responsibilities of the Federal Reserve since, and honestly, whatever you want. That's really how this site should be viewed, as a means to recruit, by appealing to the authority of the data it mangles, feigning a genuine curiosity, implying an association in order to build an audience to advocate for, well, good money, right? He even linked it here at the bottom of the site. We have bad money now, and good money is gold-backed, right?
I think in order to revert these trends that we are required to deal with the source of the problem, which is the unsustainable, predatory fiscal policies and monetary policies of the 21st century nation-state. I believe these changes are achievable through an opt-in, distributed, and open-source free market technological network called Bitcoin. Bitcoin solves the problem of the trusted third party required for final settlement in money and credit at scale.
The gold bug community shares a kinship with the cryptocurrency community. Bitcoin checks the important boxes to make it the heir apparent currency for gold bugs. As gold is geologically scarce, Bitcoin scarcity is enshrined algorithmically. They're both seen as independent from government control, as Bitcoin transactions are processed by a decentralized network of machines and, in theory, not manipulated by a single authority or small group of powerful entities or individuals. This is less significant, but Bitcoin even echoes the language of gold with its rigs and mines. But a Bitcoin standard, like a gold standard, would be quite bad. Bitcoin is, as of the time of publication, a speculative instrument that's primary value is how much it's worth in dollars, and it is very volatile, making it a suboptimal store of value. Both gold and Bitcoin have inherent deflationary pressure because of a fixed supply. This creates hoarding rather than spending, which, when the wheels eventually come off for the economy, acts as the opposite of stimulus. And there's no policy remedy or lender of last resort to do anything about that. So we've taken this recession and turned it into a depression. Practically, it would be lousy to transact with, and this problem gets worse with scale. A lot of people point to transactions per second and how the Bitcoin network can process all of 7 transactions per second, which on the scale of a national economy is not good. And evangelists say this is a bad metric because, of course they do, before saying Bitcoin is just a layer 1 solution and you need more layers to enable transactions at scale. So you're going to spawn a whole bunch of intermediaries and potentially torpedo the pseudonymous nature of this thing. And on that note, there may not be like a scary building to point at and say, look, a gatekeeper, but Bitcoin is lousy with power concentration and transaction fees too. According to a 2021 working paper in the National Bureau of Economics, the top 10% of miners control 90% of Bitcoin mining capacity, and 0.1% or 50 miners control 50% of mining capacity. These are the people who are settling transactions. So you have gatekeepers and enough power concentration for collusion. What does that mean for the security of your money from a 51% takeover? It doesn't look great. And that's just a subset. I'm not even getting into all the national security or like environmental concerns here. While elements of this movement may say a Bitcoin standard or a gold standard is not synonymous with ridding of the Federal Reserve and they can coexist, the two, as we're discussing them, are effectively mutually exclusive. You could nominally retain the Federal Reserve, like the title of the organization, but it would cease to do what it does today and be like a depository of Bitcoin or gold. I'm falling back into the rabbit hole of trying to engage with the prescribed solution of WTF happened in 1971.com on the basis of facts. But similar to understanding its motivations and the whys behind the graphs, this is better understood by what isn't explicitly said by the creators or Bitcoin standard evangelists. This movement, its dedication to anti-government political sentiment interlinked with a free market fundamentalism, is better understood as a matter of faith. And that can get pretty abstract pretty quickly, so I want to close by talking about a single man. That man is Friedrich August von Hayek, Nobel Prize winner and Austrian economist. He was born in 1899 and passed away in 1992. He lived through an interesting near century. One of the most averse to central planning and most steadfast believers in the free market you can find, and for this, to this day, Friedrich Hayek is a deity amongst Bitcoin standard believers on the internet. Friedrich Hayek saw much in his life. He was a working professional during the Great Depression. He saw spiraling deflation when we still had the gold standards, central banks that were not meaningfully independent from short-term political whims as they should be. Published his book, The Road to Serfdom, the same year the Bretton Woods system went into effect, and ultimately, perhaps tragically, saw the Nixon shock push his ideas more decisively to the fringe. They have not recovered to the mainstream. After the Nixon shock, Hayek wrote the book that Bitcoin and gold standard believers owe a debt to, wittingly or not, the denationalization of money. In this work, he argues, as he had much in his life, for private entities to be allowed to issue their own competitive currencies, making their margins through loans and currency trading. This had been tried in America before. At one point in the 19th century, we had over 8,000 private currencies in circulation, and it didn't really work then. I imagine a 19th century rug pull to be as easy as leaving town. This ahistoricism hasn't been sorted out amongst believers in alternative currencies even today. As we departed further and further from August 15, 1971, and deeper into a world where Hayek's ideas were relegated to the margins, the more he and his acolytes began to rely on a socio-cultural power. In my view, Hayek in his latter years began to sound more revolutionary, more maverick, that we may not know what the future holds, but we must denationalize money despite the history, despite the contradictions, despite the economics. Believers need to pose the question, WTF happened in 1971, and they need the answer in order to justify the belief, let alone bring about the monetary revolution in Hayek's name, to be monotonic economic decline. And if that's not true, the perception will do. 1971 is ultimately a year in history, a significant year alongside many others. But had we departed from the gold standard in a year other than 1971, or a year was a useful start date to showcase decline, that would be the year chosen by the creator. This site could easily be called WTF Happened in 2020 if it fit the narrative sufficiently. But despite all that, there's still one final fear, one lingering doubt. What if I'm wrong? What if I've led you astray? And what if our economic anxieties, the decline that we've experienced since 1971 specifically, really could be remedied by adopting Bitcoin as currency? What would the creator of WTF Happened in 1971.com want me to do to help correct for that? I think I know what he'd want.
can't do this?